Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Sean Gardner with Untangle. We appreciate you joining us today for our webinar on our directory connector and policy manager. We are joined on the back end by several staff members answering questions and being able to field other things that you might need to have happen. We do have quite a lot to cover today, so we'll want to go ahead and get started. As far as the audio and the question and answer panel, that's on the right-hand side. You can indicate to us through that question and answer panel if you're having a hard time hearing me or if you need me to slow down or speed up. Certainly open to any of those different feedback that we can get from you. Any questions that we're not able to get to today via the question and answer panel, then we will certainly encourage you to email us at sales@untangle.com, and we will try and respond to those as soon as we possibly can. Usually there's a lot of questions that come from a webinar like this, and certainly we hope that we can get your questions answered as we go through the details here. What we'll be covering off today is basically just kind of a quick overview of what the Untangle solution is. We'll cover off briefly a product comparison between our light package, our platform that we have, our standard package, and then our premium package. And so we'll kind of talk or show you a little grid that compares those. A lot of what we're going to be talking about is pulled from the wiki directly, and so we'll be going over the directory connector and the parts and pieces to that for our Active Directory connector as well as Radius server. And then also we'll be covering off briefly our local directory that you can use to help on networks that don't have Active Directory or some other Radius integration. We'll also be covering off the policy manager and the parts and pieces of that. And then if we have time, we'll get through to some of the captive portal stuff. We'll do a brief description of that, but most of the settings and whatnot, if we do have time, we'll cover that off in actually the demonstration portion so I can speed things along. And then we'll talk about some resources and we'll wrap up. So without any further ado, we'll talk a little bit about Untangle and what it does. It's a lot of networks today, and this has been this way for quite a few years. In the small business arena, a lot of them are doing different types of things to protect their network. And as you can see with the SMB adoption for the different features and issues that need to be taken care of, this has remained consistent, but obviously there's more and more people that are getting more and more things on their network. And it can get confusing, as well as the fact that there's always new threats or new applications that you want to integrate. And because of these new things, sometimes you can feel like a guy trying to put out fires and eventually get burned with all the things you have to do as a network administrator or even as a business owner, because a lot of times in the small business realm, you're the jack of all trades doing everything. Well, what Untangle has done is we've actually simplified things so that you can consolidate through virtualization a lot of the different features that you might need, or basically things that you might need done to the data or your filtering that you might need to do, into one solution. And you can pull that down from an online library into a virtual server, as you can see here with this graphic that I have. And as new things need to be taken care of, or as you're ready to adopt them, that you can actually just pull them down from the Untangle website and include them into your server rack. So how Untangle can do more and more for you over the years, and we've actually added quite a few features as we progress through. In addition to the fact that we're able to bring you new applications as those are vetted, as well as solutions are really picked, and we pick from the best of breed solutions out there, and even new threats or different modes of doing business like BYOD and HYOD. So as far as where you put Untangle, you can basically put us behind an existing firewall router in a bridge mode, and that's represented on the left-hand side of this graphic. And this is the most common way we're deployed, not because it's better, but because it's usually the least intrusive, and you don't have to mess around with a lot of settings if you're going to do that. So you can insert Untangle between your router firewall and the next internal network switch, and Untangle can do all of its magic that we offer, and we'll talk about a couple of those things today. In addition, maybe you have a firewall router that's getting older, and you want to replace it, Untangle has the capability to be able to be bought as a transparent bridge and then escalate it up to the edge of your network if you need to become the router firewall as necessary. Or maybe you're just have a new location and you want to start fresh with a new router firewall, and Untangle can take care of that for you. As far as the difference between Untangle and a lot of our competitors, we actually have something called virtual pipelining, which I'm going to show you an infographic on here in a minute. But the way that most other competitive products handle traffic as it comes into the network, this is a little more technical, but I'll push through it, and then certainly you can re-watch it if you want to get more information about it. But as the data comes into a network, essentially that data has to become runnable on the actual kernel and on the run queue. And so there's a thread that's created, and then that data, as it's handed after it's scanned, that data is just discarded, and the authentication process happens again and again, and then the authentication is discarded while it goes from different proxy chain to different proxy chain. And what that does is, as you're going through on a network, that actually increases the number of context switches the data has to go through, as well as the buffer copies. And essentially what that adds up to is latency. So as you can see here with these 4 context switches and proxy chains that are linked together, these application proxies, on a light load, you're looking at a 20 millisecond queue wait as an example. And with 4 of them, that gets you 80 milliseconds of latency. And if the load is higher, then certainly that increases as well. The way Untangle handles traffic is we actually take the traffic, we authenticate it once, and then we vector that traffic to the layer 7, to the application layer. And then we do all the scanning we need to do on it, and then we pop it out the other ends and recreate the packet, basically making it so that there's less context switches and buffer copies, and in essentially basically making it so that in this example you'll see with these 4 application modules we have and the virtual pipelining technology, it's over an 8 times improvement. So certainly it's something that you'll want to possibly ask your existing vendor about if you're not an Untangle customer already. As far as the comparison between the Untangle platform, we have some information available on our website, but a lot of our light package features, those are free. You can use those forever. And then if you need additional assistance, then you can see that we have the standard package and the premium package. And we have different features included. And we'll be talking today about the directory connector and the policy manager. And the captive portal is actually found in the light package. So we'll cover off that if we do have time, as well as plenty of these other solutions that are available. And you can see that the premium package includes the spam blocker, the WAN balancer, WAN failover, the bandwidth control module, web cache, and the premium virus blocker that comes with the premium package. So depending on what you need to do for your network, that really helps you to decide. And of course, you can buy any of our modules as application modules as a standalone, but certainly the best value from a purchase standpoint is to get one of our packages that we've created for you. As far as the directory connector goes, basically that's divided up, as I mentioned, into the Active Directory and the Radius server. And so what essentially the directory connector allows you to do, as you can see, it allows you to use these different directories to be able to match up those usernames and to the IP addresses that they're using so that you can create different policies using our policy manager. And also you can show what people are doing, who's doing what on the reports, so that you can audit that properly. And that's definitely important when you're trying to keep track of your employees or students, and you definitely want to make sure that you keep a good handle on who's going where and who's using what. As far as the Active Directory connector goes, we support all the way back to Windows Server 2000, and then you can see that we have that working on up to Windows Server 2012, Release 2, or Release Candidate 2. So if you need additional support or help on that, certainly we'd want you to give our support team a call. But as far as the actual Active Directory connector is concerned, This Active Directory Connector tab, it contains the settings for connecting and communicating with a domain controller. Other applications such as Captive Portal can use Directory Connector to authenticate and identify users against an existing domain controller. So a couple of these different items here. This is the IP address or host name of the AD server. And we recommend that you use the IP to prevent DNS issues. And this is the port, or this basically is the port you'll use to connect to the Active Directory server, and the default port is 389. The Active Directory the authentication is basically the administrator login and, of course, the corresponding password to be able to have Untangle talk to your Active Directory domain controller. And then, of course, you need to put in the domain controller address, or the FQDN, which is basically a fully qualified domain name. And when you enter something there, it does need to be a fully qualified domain name, as basically in the Active Directory world, as far as that goes. This field is an optional field, but this allows you to put in your Active Directory organizational unit. That basically contains the different types of users. So if you want the Untangle to find all these users, then you can just leave that blank. But if for some reason you want to limit the users to a specific part of the domain tree, then you can specify the OU path in the format like OU equals OU name, depending on whatever it might be. And you can enter multiple OUs separated by a comma if you need to as well. You can use the test tools to verify your settings and view incomplete user lists. But after the Active Directory is configured, you can configure Captive Portal to use it for authenticating users if you wish to. So there's quite a few different things to consider when you're doing this, and it's not for the faint of heart. But if you want, you can use the username map for per user or per group policies, and for per user reports if you need to. So you have two choices to do this. The Active Directory logon script is one, and then the Captive Portal is another, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the demo on the Captive Portal portion. So if possible, though, we do recommend that you use the Active Directory logon script, as it will run automatically when users log in. When using Captive Portal, they will have to enter their credentials to log into the Windows, and then again to access the Internet. So it's a little bit of a duplication of effort there. But the Active Directory logon script, it's essentially, you can click on this button here, and then it will basically pull up another page where you can find a link as well as the instructions on what to do. But it's a small script that runs on the network, on the computers when they log in. So it's a little Visual Basic script. And once installed, the script starts each time the user logs onto the network and immediately notifies Untangle of the username and password, or an IP. Once this process is finished, any activity for that IP address will be automatically mapped to that username, so you can keep track of people. This script runs on login and periodically in the background to keep the Directory Connector username map updated with any current information on your network users. To download the Active Directory logon script, make sure that you're logged into the Untangle's web UI from the domain controller itself. And then on the Active Directory Connector tab, you can click on the AD login script button and download the script. As you can see here, I've highlighted that. That's actually a hyperlink to download that file. So now that you have the Active Directory logon script on your domain controller, you need to decide if you want to run that for all the domain users or only for the specific users. And again, we talked briefly about that, but that's something I would recommend that you jump over to our wiki to really help determine what you want to do there when actually using the Active Directory logon script. And so these little areas here on the screen, if you were to click the Active Directory users, that would show you a list of who's actually visible to Untangle. And that's something that you can use to check to make sure your domain is properly syncing up to Untangle, as well as you have some other sort options there to use the group map if you want to look at that instead of using the group, and also you can refresh the group cache if you need to. Let's jump to the radius connector. And the radius, basically, it enables you to authenticate to a directory using a radius protocol. And it's a fairly old protocol. But other applications such as Captive Portal can use the radius connector as well to authenticate and identify users against an existing radius server. So if you have something else, typically it's going to have the ability to plug into a radius or become a radius server as needed. And then you can actually use this section instead. On here we have the IP address or host name of the radius server. Again, we recommend using the IP address to prevent any DNS issues. And then, of course, the default port for radius is port 1812, but you can certainly use another port if you want to. And then the shared secret, basically this just needs to match the shared secret on the radius server so that it'll authenticate properly. And then, of course, the authentication method, this has got to match the authentication method on the radius server as well. And you can use the test tool to verify your settings. So after radius is configured, you can configure Captive Portal to use it for authenticating users if you wish. And the different types of protocols options are PAP, which is the password authentication protocol, and the CHAP, which is challenge handshake authentication protocol. And then, of course, we've got the test button there that you can use to make sure that it's functioning properly. On the actual event log, you can see we basically got the timestamp, which is basically the date and time of the directory connector users, and it will be whether it's an Active Directory user or a radius user, so you can see them there. The client would be the IP address that the client that made the request, basically, for Active Directory. Then, of course, the username is going to show up based on what the Active Directory or radius username is. And then, of course, the action is basically the action that was logged for that particular client. And it's really about whether it's connected or not. So pretty straightforward as far as the Active Directory or directory connector that we have. And, of course, you can see some other options down below to refresh the view. If you want to auto-refresh it, say you want to do a review of that, or if you've got a lot of users, you can scroll through multiple pages as needed. And then, of course, you've got the help button at the bottom of the screen there on the left. So on the screens for any of the Untangle applications, you can click the help button, and it will take you to that section of our online wiki, which will allow you to review that. The local directory user is, or the local user directory is actually found on the left-hand side of the admin interface, and we'll show you that here when I get into the demo. But essentially, if you prefer not to use, or if you don't have the ability to use Active Directory or Radius Server, then you can use this instead. And so basically to add a new user, you just click the Add button. It's pretty straightforward. But you need to supply the username, the first name, the last name, email address, and the password. And then in version 10, which is going to be coming out shortly, you can actually set an expiration time for these users as well. So if you want it to never expire, if you want to have it be a static user, you can do that. But you can see on the second option down, or the second person down there, that I've got that user name expiring today at 1 p.m. my time. So that's a cool new feature that's going to be available. And then, of course, you have the ability to, there's next to the Add button, there's a Clean Up Expired Users. So basically, that's just going to remove them from off the list. And so the user directory, the local user directory, for those of you that don't have Active Directory or Radius, this can be actually a fairly helpful feature to be able to go in and create users. Or maybe if you have guest access, but you don't want to go through the pain to create a user through Active Directory or Radius, then you can create a temporary username here for someone and have it expire at a certain time. So that definitely makes that a lot easier. On to Policy Manager. Basically, it's one of Untangle's most powerful features, and it works by allowing you to create virtual racks, much like a traditional server rack. But with the server racks, Untangle's virtual racks can contain multiple devices or applications that perform different functions on network traffic, such as filtering web content or filtering spam. Policy Manager allows you to create policy rules that send traffic to different racks, which can contain multiple independently configured applications. And these different features are available to you, basically like setting up multiple racks for different user groups, like teachers, administrators, and staff. You can also choose what applications are running in each rack. You can configure applications in separate racks independently. You can also configure multiple applications in separate racks simultaneously if you want to use kind of the parent rack system we have available. Essentially what that allows you to do is to copy the configuration of the applications from another rack, but not all of the different applications. So if you only have certain things you want to do, then you can do that. So we're basically going to talk through the settings of this as well. And you can see here, this is the new, or a couple of screenshots from the new version 10, and we'll jump into that and you'll see what that looks like when I jump into the demonstration. But when you basically, the Untangle will always have at least one rack. And so the default rack is really the one that's going to always be there. You can rename it if you want to, but you can't remove that rack. And as we kind of talked about before, you can create different rules to send traffic to different racks where it is processed by those applications. And the racks and policies are created from within the policy manager. And but the Untangle, the GUI from Untangle itself is used to switch between those by clicking on the drop-down menu. Then you can see the different options. You know, on the rack that I have and took the screenshots from, I've got a default rack and I've got a more restrictive rack. And then, of course, you've got a couple of our show sessions and show hosts, which are available as well as clicking on the show policy manager jumps you into the policy manager to be able to modify those things. But essentially what the parent rack, to get a little bit more detailed about that, when you create a new rack, it will not contain any applications. But you can add in any applications you want and configure them to whatever you'd like to do. Or you can use the parent rack system. So when creating the new rack, using the policy manager, you have the option to select a parent rack. If you use this option, your rack will be pre-populated with all applications and settings from the parent rack you selected. However, it will look a little different. As you can see on the screenshot on the right, there's a little mouse over that you can see where when you hover over one of the kind of shaded applications, it tells you that that app belongs to a parent rack. And so the more restricted rack you can see has a parent rack of the default rack on these two different screenshots that I've taken. So when you view the new child rack, the application faceplates will be grayed out, as we kind of talked about. But in order to make changes to the virus blocker in this example, then you'd actually need to go to the parent rack to make those changes. If you wanted to configure something different like web filter, like I have, you need to actually click the install button again on the left for that child rack view, and then it'll make it so that you can pull that in and make changes appropriately to that child rack. But you can, have them inherit settings from each other and basically be related to each other, and you can do it in multiple different ways. So it's definitely very effective, but it also makes it so you don't have to do quite so much work. Let's see, jump over to the actual policies that you can set up. So you can see here we've got the name option, and so basically that's just the naming of the rack that's going to be displayed on that drop-down that I showed you. And then, of course, you've got the description, which describes that rack, and you can call it whatever, say whatever you want about it. I'm not sure what the limitations as far as text, the amount of text you can use, but the actual parent rack, basically what this just indicates is what rack, if any, is the parent rack of the rack that you're just creating. So all you have to do is click the Add button, and it's going to have you name it and describe it, and then decide whether you want a parent rack, and then it's going to list it here after you've completed that. And then we have to get into the rules section. So as you need to add additional rules, and if you've been following along to this point, if you create a new rack, unless you send traffic to it, the rack is actually not going to be doing anything. So the way you get this accomplished is you add a rule, and then when each of those new sessions is processed, then the rules are evaluated in order. So it's going to hit the time to go to church rule that I've got set up, and the time for bed rule that I got set up as well, in order of succession. But as far as the default rack, once it's evaluated these rules, then it's going to basically default to the default rack for those users. So the Rules tab with Policy Manager settings and basically allows you to kind of customize or configure what you want to have happen. And when you're creating a rule, let me just get to, here we go. So this is kind of the create page of the rule itself. And in the create section, you can see that you have the ability to pick a number of different conditions for the rule itself. And you can add quite a few. I've basically highlighted the drop-down because those are all the options you have. And then, of course, you have the ability to pick the target rack, which is underneath that. And so you create a rule, and you say, okay, I want this rack to be mapped to that. Or in the case of my children at my home office here, at 10 o'clock, between 10 and midnight on Sunday through Thursday, I want them to be mapped to the more restrictive rack, which essentially shuts off our internet here. But it's a pretty straightforward process when you actually are configuring it. And again, you can create multiple items there, and then you can reorder them using the little cross over here. So it makes it so you can do that. Now, one of the things that you'll want to be or make sure of is when you're making policy condition changes and changing the rules themselves, your Untangle is going to reset the connections so that it'll reapply them. So you want to make sure that if you're going to do that, you do it when it's not going to negatively affect your network. So if you have things to change, or if you are okay with doing connections during the day, fine. If not, you can do them out of hours when there's not a lot of people connected to make sure that you're not interrupting the flow of business or classes or whatever organization type you may have in order to do that. As far as the event log is concerned, it's pretty straightforward like the other event logs, but you can see there's the timestamp and date, and then you've got the client IP address, and that's the internal IP address of the client for the policy that's going to be applying. You can also see what port's being used or accessed. And then, of course, if you add Active Directory or a username, then you'd be able to see the actual username there and the server that they're accessing and what port they're accessing that server across. And then finally, you can also see what policy rack that you've created is applicable for that. And it's pretty straightforward, but it's also fairly helpful. And you can see that it goes up to 40 pages because that's as much as we can render. Moving on, we'll talk briefly about the captive portal here, and then we'll jump into the actual Untangle itself and see if we can do some more explanation there. The captive portal basically it just allows you to require network users to log in or accept network acceptable use policies before accessing the internet. And so it can basically authenticate these users, as we've talked about, against the built-in local directory that we showed you, as well as you can take a look at the Active Directory and have it integrate with that. Of course, you have to have the directory connector if you're going to use the Active Directory or the Radius. But it also can be used to set up policies on Policy Manager, so you can use it by the username, as I've done, since I don't have Active Directory. But the captive portal, when that's running, it's basically just going to capture machines, and it'll force them to authenticate or press the checkbox or OK to the acceptable use policy that's available. So let's switch over here. Let's see if I can jump over to my Untangle interface. And I'm logging into my local box. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. And so this is basically the way that the new version 10 admin interface is going to be looking. This is the default view. You can see quite a few different things here. You've got your Apps tab and your Config tab. Your config tab on the left, it's got quite a few options, and you can click into networking. You can click in the administration. We'll go over when we do the community webinar in version 10 more about some of the changes that have happened or are happening with version 10. But we're going to just talk about the Policy Manager, Directory Connector, and Captive Portal today. But as far as the virtual rack setup, again, here is the drop-down where we can see the multiple racks. If we wanted to look at the more restrictive rack, as I hover my mouse over, it shows me that this has got a parent rack. And if I wanted to come over here, you'll see that there's now apps there for the additional rack that I've created. As far as the Captive Portal, let's jump back to the default rack to show you what that really is about. And I have mine running currently, and you can see I've got my children and the machines that they typically use, and then you can see I've got a Wi-Fi one that I use, and then a non-Wi-Fi machine that I use, and they have different IP addresses because they're different actual adapters. And you can see how many sessions as far as the actual status looks like, and you can refresh this too, so if you want to see if new users have logged in. In addition, you can create, so with the capture rules, you can make it so that people can log in more than once with those capture rules, so that if they have more than one device, then they can do that, and you'll be able to see it. So if I were to spin up or turn on my Wi-Fi on my phone, then a capture rule would come up for that, because it would A, get a different IP address, and B, it would allow me to log in using my username with different credentials and what time. And then you can decide how long you want that actual lease time to be for the capture rules. So let's just jump in. And you can see I've got the capture rule set up to capture everything that's on a non-WAN connection on my Untangle. And of course, you have several options. You can, like the other firewall rule set up, you can, or at least the nomenclature, you can pick username. If you, for example, have a setup where you have the Active Directory logon script for your users, but they don't, they also want to bring in their laptops, for example, then what you can do is you can do a little capture rule that says, okay, if I don't know, or if there is no username, then that's when I want to apply the capture rule. So if they're using a box, or if maybe they have a Windows machine that is part of the domain, and when they log in, it's going to transparently do the Active Directory logon script, but maybe they want to use their iPhone or whatever. Then what you can do here is, if the Untangle doesn't know what that device username is, then this capture rule that I've just created here is going to actually make it so that the capture rule comes up, and they have to then authenticate to identify them on another device, which is very helpful when you're actually trying to keep track of all the different devices people are bringing in and out of a network. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel out of that. You can also see here where you can pass certain addresses, like client addresses or even servers if you need. You can see I've actually put in my printer and our PS3 so that the capture rule doesn't come up for those, so that they actually won't be interrogated or captured by the captive portal. Also, you can set up different options for the captive page. So if you want to just have them agree to a checkbox, then you can come here and use the basic message option, put in your acceptable use policy here, and then that will allow them to just hit OK or yes, I agree to the acceptable use policy, and then it'll let them go on their merry way. The other option, say you're a business owner and you have a Starbucks or whatever, and you, after they do the capture page and they authenticate or they accept your acceptable use policy, then you can actually do a redirect here. So you can send them to your business website or the school website, or depending on what kind of an organization you are. So there's quite a few different options that you have. And of course, the way I have mine set up, it's going to basically interrogate them and make them put in the username and password for the local directory that I've created. But we have some other options as well, like custom pages that you can do. And you have to be a little bit more knowledgeable about how this works in order to do these. But we have a couple of samples I want to just show you, not on this particular box, but on the wiki. If you wanted to do a custom login page, you could totally do that. You can add your own skin or your own icon, have it say whatever you want. There's also even a custom agree page if you want. And these are all samples that you'll find in the wiki. So if you have somebody that's a developer that's like, well, do you have something that's an example I can look at? And then they can modify it, then you can definitely tell them that. Maybe you're a hotel and you want to have people enter their last name and their room number before they can access the internet you're providing. And then, of course, you can have then it redirect to the actual page of your website, for the hotel's website. But there's quite a few different options. You can also have a custom login where the username and password, and then it will expire after a certain amount of time. You can tell them that or not. But there's plenty of different options that you have, and we've got different screenshots that allows you to even have people register on the fly to have a username. So if you want to be able to give the people the option to do that, then you can. But quite a few different options with the Captive Portal. The user authentication we've talked about fairly in depth already. You can do an idle timeout, and that's basically when the client that they're using is completely inactive. So there's no, if you wanted to have it only be for a certain amount of minutes, if 0 is there, then that's basically disabling that. I have mine set to 1,440 minutes, which is essentially 24 hours. And you can also allow those concurrent logins here and pick, you can do the radius here if you wanted. And it's pretty basic if you're just going to change that. So the actual event log is pretty basic as well. Timestamp, client, the IP, and the username, and whether the action was successful or not. And then what's the authentication method, whether it's against the local directory or not. Down here you can essentially see any of the different options on the event log. You can see whether there was any of the successes or failures. If you want to see everything, you can do that. And also you can, if you've got different racks, then you can pick for a specific rack that's going to do that. So, and then if we had any rules set up, then you're going to be able to see kind of a rule event log. So this is essentially when things are going to be interrupted when they're captured, just to confirm that they are captured. And again, you can scroll through on these as well. But there's a lot of power in these applications, even though they're not very well understood by a lot of our users. So hopefully this webinar today has been helpful to you. And there's going to be some fun stuff coming in version 10. I think you'll enjoy, like our HTTPS inspector and some other items that I think will really make it fun and also make Untangle even more effective in being able to use it. So let me jump back to our PowerPoint, and we'll cover off a couple quick things, and then we will end, because obviously you have lots of stuff to do throughout your day. A lot of the stuff that I've earlier talked about is found in our wiki, and you can go to wiki.untangle.com, or you can certainly go to the packages page, or feel free to give us a call, and we're more than happy to help you. If you haven't yet tried Untangle, we certainly encourage you to do that. There's not enough people that are actually protecting themselves from the things that are causing non-productive actions at work or at school. And Untangle is definitely here to help. We want to make sure that you can make your business or your organization as successful and as productive as possible. And so we encourage you to try out Untangle by going to our download page. Again, you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter and YouTube, the forums. You can send us an email for any questions that we're not able to get to today at sales. You can send those to sales@untangle.com. or you can call us at 866-233-2296, and we are happy to help you. And hopefully you've had a good experience today. Hopefully I haven't covered off too much too quickly. Just to answer the question, if it's been asked, I'm sure, is that we are recording this, and so for anyone that is in attendance or not in attendance, you'll be getting a recorded version of this within the next 24 hours, and anyone that's registered as well should get that also. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and letting us share about Untangle and our Active Directory, Directory Connector, I should say, and our Policy Manager, and even a little bit about our captive portal. Thank you, and you have a great day.